Today we're diving into the fascinating history of the Aryans of India. This story takes us back thousands of years and shows how interconnected our world really is. Let's get started. You might be surprised to learn that many languages spoken across Europe and parts of Asia share common roots. Greeks, Italians, Russians, Germans, and even the Irish all speak languages that, despite their differences, have similar words and roots. For instance, the word for father is père in French, pitta in Sanskrit, and pater in Greek and Latin. These similarities suggest that all these diverse groups, Hindus, Persians, Greeks, Latins, Celts, Germans, and Slavs, were once one people, speaking the same language, and these ancient people called themselves Aryans. They lived in the northwestern regions of India, likely in the Pamir Mountains or the steppes of Turkestan or Russia. From there, they spread out in all directions. Over time, most of these groups forgot their origins, but the sacred texts of the Hindus and Persians have preserved these old traditions. The Aryans were a pastoral, patriarchal, and martial people. They lived in villages, raised cattle and sheep, and fought with lances, javelins, and shields. The head of the family was both a priest and a ruler, leading a life deeply rooted in tradition and family values. About 2,000 years before the Common Era, some Aryan tribes crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains and entered India. They encountered the native people of the Indus Valley, who they called Dasyas or enemies. After many battles, the Aryans eventually took over the Indus Valley and called themselves Hindus, and the Aryans had a rich tradition of singing hymns, known as Vedas, during their ceremonies. These hymns, collected around the 14th century BC, form the oldest religious texts of the Hindus. They worshipped devas, or gods, who represented everything that shone, like the heavens, dawn, clouds, stars, and especially the sun, Indra, and fire, Agni. Indra was seen as a powerful god of the sun who rode across the sky on a chariot drawn by blue horses. He wielded the thunderbolt, sent rain, and cleared the clouds. The Aryans viewed thunderstorms as battles between Indra and the evil serpent Vritra, who trapped life-giving waters in a cavern. Indra's victory released these waters, bringing rain to the earth. Agni, the god of fire, was another significant deity. Fire was seen as a gift from the heavens, a benefactor that provided warmth, cooked food, and protected homes. Agni was not just a household helper but also a symbol of the internal fire, the soul of the world. To honor their gods, the Aryans lit fires by rubbing sticks together and made offerings of butter, milk, and a fermented drink called soma. They also sacrificed cattle, rams, and horses, singing hymns to praise their gods and invite their blessings. For example, they would call upon Indra to drink soma and enjoy their offerings, hoping in return for protection and prosperity. Alongside their gods, the Aryans also worshipped their ancestors, believing they had become divine. This practice was a crucial part of family life. The father, who was the priest and ruler of the household, made daily offerings to the gods and ancestors at the hearth fire, a symbol of life and continuity. And now let's explore how the Aryan society evolved as they moved beyond the Indus Valley to the vast plains of the Ganges. Between the 14th and 10th centuries BC, the Aryans conquered the fertile plains of the Ganges. This new environment, with its hot climate and abundance of slave labor, gradually transformed their customs and religion, leading to the establishment of Brahmanic society. Many important Sanskrit works from this time, including epic poems like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, along with the sacred laws of Manu, form the cornerstone of Hindu literature. In this new society, poets who once chanted hymns became professional theologians revered by the people. According to their beliefs, the supreme god Brahma created 4 types of people, each with a specific mission. From his mouth came the Brahmins, the theologians whose role was to study, teach hymns, and perform sacrifices. From his arms came the Kshatriyas, the warriors tasked with protecting the people. From his thighs emerged the Vaishyas, responsible for raising cattle, farming, lending money, and trading. Finally, from his feet came the Shudras, whose duty was to serve the other 3 classes. Previously, these roles were more fluid, but the Brahmins decided that each person should remain in the caste they were born into, making the system hereditary and rigid. The son of a worker could never become a warrior, and the son of a warrior could never become a theologian. This division created 4 strictly separate and closed castes. Those not included in these 4 castes were deemed unclean and excluded from society and religion. The Brahmins identified 44 grades of outcasts, with the pariahs being the lowest. These outcasts were forbidden from practicing any respectable trade or approaching other people. They could only own dogs and donkeys, animals considered unclean, and were required to wear garments of the dead and use broken pots as plates. Brahmins occupied the highest place in society. They were regarded as superior to all other men, including kings. Unlike priests in Egypt and Chaldea, Brahmins were scholars who spent their time reading and meditating on sacred texts. They lived off the gifts given to them by others and, to this day, remain a dominant class in India. By marrying only among themselves, they have preserved the Aryan type better than other Hindus and more closely resemble Europeans. And the Brahmins didn't abandon the ancient gods of the Vedas but invented a new supreme deity, Brahma. In their view, prayer became the highest power, even above the gods. Brahma was not a creator god but the very substance of the universe. All beings, including gods, humans, animals, and even plants and stones, were considered part of Brahma, naturally emerging from him as trees grow from seeds, and the belief in the transmigration of souls was central to this religion. Every being contained a part of Brahma's soul, and these souls moved from one body to another after death. Good souls ascended to heaven or became saints or gods, while bad souls descended into animals or plants. This cycle continued until the soul achieved perfection and was absorbed back into Brahma. According to the Brahmins, this process took around 24 million years. While the early Aryan religion was simple and joyful, the Brahmanic religion became more complex and rigid. It was practiced by those not engaged in everyday life, and its rituals became numerous and intricate. There were prayers, offerings, vows, libations, and ablutions for every aspect of life. Even mundane actions like walking, eating, and bathing were governed by religious rules. Purity was a principal duty. Everything from people outside the castes to certain animals and objects could cause pollution, requiring immediate purification. For every breach of these rituals, there was a penance, often severe, such as following a herd of cows day and night or drinking boiling liquid as punishment for drinking arak. To maintain purity and avoid these dangers, some Brahmins chose to leave society and become monks. In their old age, after a life of studying the Vedas, practicing all rites, and raising a family, they retreated to the desert. There, they fasted, kept vigil, refrained from speech, and endured harsh conditions. Through these mortifications, they sought to destroy passion and elevate themselves to Brahma through contemplation. And in ancient times, many people who were not Brahmins suffered under the rigid and intricate customs of their society. During this period, a man emerged with a doctrine of deliverance. He was not a Brahmin but belonged to the Kshatriya caste, the son of a northern king. This man, who later became known as Buddha, lived a sheltered life in his father's palace until the age of 29. One day, he encountered an old man with a bald head, wrinkled features, and trembling limbs. Another time, he met an incurable invalid, covered in ulcers and without a home. Lastly, he came across a decaying corpse being devoured by worms. These encounters led him to realize that youth, health, and life are fleeting and vulnerable to old age, sickness, and death. Filled with compassion for humanity, he sought a remedy for their suffering. Buddha then met a religious mendicant with a grave and dignified demeanor, inspiring him to renounce the world. He fled to the desert, where he spent 7 years living in penance, enduring hunger, thirst, and rain. Despite these mortifications, he found no peace. It was only after he resumed eating and became physically strong again that he discovered the truth. Buddha returned to the world to preach this truth, gathering many disciples who called him Buddha, meaning the Enlightened One. After 45 years of teaching, Buddhism was firmly established. Buddha taught that to live is to be unhappy. People suffer because they desire worldly goods, youth, health, and life, which they cannot retain. All life is suffering, and all suffering stems from desire. To eliminate suffering, one must extinguish desire by ceasing to wish for life, thereby emancipating oneself from the thirst of being. The wise person rejects all attachments to life, ceases to feel, wish, and think, thereby becoming free from passion and volition. After death, Such a person can achieve the supreme good, liberation from all life and suffering, known as nirvana, which is the annihilation of personality. And the Brahmins also viewed life as a place of suffering and saw annihilation as ultimate happiness. However, Buddha introduced new sentiments. While Brahmanism was largely egoistic, Buddha's teachings were rooted in compassion and love for humanity. He urged his disciples to love even those who harmed them. One of his disciples, Purna, exemplified this teaching. When Purna went to preach to barbarians, Buddha warned him about the cruel and passionate people he might encounter. Purna, undeterred, expressed that he would see any harm done to him as a blessing, as it would free him from the polluted body. Impressed, Buddha encouraged him to proceed, aiming for nirvana and helping others achieve it as well. And Buddha preached equality and fraternity, rejecting the Brahmin notion of caste superiority. He accepted disciples from all walks of life, including pariahs, beggars, and even criminals. He taught them in simple language, using parables. Buddha believed all humans were equal, stating, "The Brahmin, just like the pariah, is born of a woman. Why should he be noble and the other vile?" In contrast to the Brahmins, who were consumed with minute religious rites and regarded non-observers as criminal, Buddha demanded neither rites nor exertions. He taught that salvation could be achieved through charity, chastity, and benevolence. He emphasized that doing a little good was more valuable than performing arduous religious tasks. Buddha's doctrine was one of mercy, which is why it resonated more with the downtrodden than with the fortunate. About 500 years before Christ, a religion of a new sort was established, Buddhism, a religion without a god or rituals, focused on loving one's neighbor and self-improvement, offering annihilation as the ultimate reward. It preached self-renunciation, love for others, equality, charity, and tolerance. Despite bitter opposition from the Brahmins, Buddhism spread to Ceylon, Indochina, Tibet, China, and Japan. Today, it is followed by around 500 million people. Over the centuries, Buddhism evolved. Buddha had originally formed communities of monks who took vows of poverty and chastity, wearing rags and begging for food. These monks rapidly multiplied, founding convents and holding councils to establish doctrines and rules. As they grew powerful, they began to see themselves as superior to laypeople, asserting that feeding one monk was more commendable than feeding thousands of laypeople. In Tibet, monks and nuns form a significant portion of the population, and their leader, the Grand Lama, is revered as an incarnation of God. Buddhist theology also became more complex, with elaborate cosmologies and numerous worlds filled with gods, men, beasts, and demons. The universe itself is seen as cyclic, constantly being annihilated and reborn over vast periods called kalpas. And initially honored as a perfect man, Buddha was later deified, with idols erected in his honor and worship offered to him. His disciples were also venerated, with pyramids and shrines built to house their relics. Pilgrims came from far and wide to honor the impressions of Buddha's foot. Modern Buddhists often view prayer as a magical formula. They spend their days reciting prayers, sometimes in languages they do not understand, and have even invented prayer machines, cylinders with prayers written on them, which count as recitations each time they are spun. Despite these changes, Buddhism remains a religion of peace and charity. In regions where Buddhism prevails, kings refrain from war and the chase, establish hospitals and asylums, and welcome strangers, including Christian missionaries. Women enjoy more freedom, and violence is rare. For instance, Bangkok, a city of 400,000 people, records only one murder a year. Buddhism has softened people's characters and promoted peace and charity wherever it has taken root.